This is part 15 in the series, The State of the United States Economy and Society. Again, I am Edward J. Dodson, and the subject of this presentation is the crisis with the environment. Our homes, our places of work, where we shop or engage in almost any activity, are linked together by a complex infrastructure network. That network requires continuous maintenance and periodic replacement. Maintenance and replacement requires public revenue, as well as access to necessary natural resources. The subject and issues involved deserve a far more detailed analysis than I'm able to present here, but what follows provides some insight into the state of our ecosystems, natural resources, and physical infrastructure. Let's take a look at nature as the source of our wealth. One of the great responsibilities of government is to provide the public goods and services needed to ensure a high quality of life. We are totally dependent on what nature provides to sustain ourselves and our communities. And yet there is a deep debate and disagreement over the extent to which we have abrogated our responsibilities as stewards of our natural environment. Political economists of the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries used the term land to take in all of the natural world, the source of the tangible wealth we produce by our labor and with increasingly sophisticated tools or capital goods. Economists, for their own reasons of analysis, decided that entrepreneurship was distinct and from other forms of labor. What is most important to remember is that nature is our commons, the source of what we produce that rightfully then belongs to the producer as private property, subject to rules of use that do not cause harm to others or to the environment. From nature comes our raw materials and wildlife, and again, the source of what we rightfully claim as our property, subject again to certain reasonable laws and restrictions on how we exploit nature and eventually dispose of what remains after our property is consumed or depreciates and loses its usefulness. As our population has spread around the globe and has increased to some 8.2 billion people from 1.6 billion people in 1900, so has the amount of material we discard every day, threatening the very commons on which we are so dependent. We have yet to come to terms with the massive amount of waste for which we must continuously find new places to accumulate. Changing how goods are produced has now reached a level of critical concern, so that we approach zero waste and near 100% reuse of materials. What nature yields as resources for energy is an important issue. According to recent data, the annual output of energy from all sources globally is approximately 172 petawatt hours, which translates to around 19.6 terawatts of power generation per year, with the majority of this energy still coming from fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas. The U.S. Department of Energy reported in October of 2024 that the nation's output of electricity increased by 18% from 2001 to 2023. Renewable energy sources increased from 7.8% to 25.7% during the same period, while coal dropped from 51% to 15%. As of January 1, 2024, the demonstrated reserve base of coal deposits was estimated to contain 469 billion short tons of coal. The actual proportion of coal deposits that can be recovered from undisturbed deposits varies from less than 40% in some underground mines to more than 90% at some surface mines. Also, because of property rights, land use conflicts, and physical and environmental restrictions, only about 53% of these reserves may be available or accessible for mining. The U.S. Energy Information Administration estimates that as of January 1, 2014, there were about 2,474 trillion cubic feet of recoverable resources of dry natural gas. At the rate of consumption in 2014, this is enough natural gas to last about 90 years. Texas and Pennsylvania are the largest sources of what is referred to as dry natural gas, which is natural gas that is mostly methane and has had most of its liquid hydrocarbons removed in order to serve the consumer market. Although natural gas liquids and dry natural gas may be industry standards, shale gas is also equally important to drillers. Shale gas comes from the shale rock and is extracted through the fracking method. What is referred to as tight oil is crude oil that is trapped in low permeability rock formations. Texas is a state with the largest volume of proved reserves of crude oil, and in 2021 it had the largest net increase in proved reserves in the United States. Proved reserves in New Mexico increased 39%, or 1.4 billion barrels, which was the second largest increase on record for any state. The U.S. Energy Information Administration warned in September of 2024 that drought conditions across the United States, and particularly in the Pacific Northwest, were having a significant impact on hydroelectric power generation. In August 2024, utility-scale generation of solar energy averaged 63.1 gigawatt hours between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. each day in the lower 48 states, 36% more than for the same hours in August 2023. The Solar Energy Industries Association reported in April that there are more than 7,800 solar projects across the United States and another 1,200 major energy storage projects. This photograph is of a new California installation in the Mojave Desert that has nearly 2 million solar panels and more than 120,000 batteries. U.S. wind power capacity was bigger than ever in 2023. Part of a decade-long growth trend for renewable energy. The U.S. generated 425,235 gigawatt hours of electricity from wind in 2023, enough to power the equivalent of more than 39 million average American homes. Wind accounts for more than one-third of the current electricity mix in 6 states: Iowa, Kansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, South Dakota, and North Dakota. Most of the geothermal power plants in the United States are in western states and Hawaii, where geothermal energy resources are close to the Earth's surface. California generates the most electricity from geothermal energy. The Geysers Dry Steam Reservoir in Northern California is the largest known dry steam field in the world and has been producing electricity since 1960. What about resources extracted or harvested? Let's take a look. In 2024, the United States produced iron ore with an estimated value of $5.5 billion, a 2% increase from 2023. Iron ore prices fluctuated throughout the year, but stabilized around $100 by the end of the year. Some 90% of the remaining U.S. iron ore is found in the region around Lake Superior. In 2022, domestic gold production was estimated to be 170 tons, 9% less than in 2021, a trend that goes back to 2018 when U.S. gold production peaked at 245 tons. The opposite happened with silver. In 2022, the U.S. produced 1,100 tons, slightly above the 2017 production of 1,020 tons. Nevertheless, thanks to robust gold prices, producers in the western U.S. have experienced a positive year. A growing supply of lithium is essential to meet the rapidly growing demand for electric batteries. Although there are proposals to develop 72 mines to extract the mineral, opponents have pointed out that the mines will divert billions of gallons of water from the water-short states of the Southwest. The one mine now in operation in Nevada has drained 4 billion gallons of water each year since 2020. Underground water sources are on the verge of disappearing altogether. Several alternatives to lithium-ion batteries are being explored, including sodium-ion batteries, solid-state batteries, and zinc-air batteries. These technologies offer potential advantages in terms of cost, safety, and performance. Copper is critical to the energy transition due to its electrical and thermal conductivity properties. Copper demand for solar cells could triple by 2040. Copper demand for wind power could more than double, and copper demand for electric vehicles is anticipated to increase from 185,000 tons in 2017 to 1.74 million tons by 2027. That is a 9.4 times increase. Added to this is the electrical vehicle charging infrastructure and upgrades to national grids that are needed. Let's now take a look at land use devoted to food production. In 2024, the total amount of land in farms in the United States was 876,460,000 acres, down from 2023. The average farm size was 466 acres, up from 464 acres in 2023. This map indicates the percentage of land in each state classified as farmland, totaling just under 41% of the total area. This is the most recent map publicly available. In 2022, sales of organic products increased 32% since the last census was conducted in 2017, while the number of farms with organic sales decreased 5%. The top 5 states for organic sales in 2022 remained unchanged from 2017. California was the top state, again with $3.7 billion, followed by Washington, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Oregon. The value of U.S. agricultural exports, not adjusting for inflation, peaked in fiscal year 2022 before declining in 2023. Total exports were valued at $178.7 billion in 2023, a $17 billion decrease from 2022. 4 categories typically accounted for about 90% of total agricultural exports. These categories include grains and feeds, oil seeds and products, animals, for example, livestock and poultry, meats and products, and horticultural products. In 2024, the United States exported $176 billion in agricultural products to 189 countries and territories. We need to be concerned about how we have abused the land, of course. So let's take a look at what's going on there. There are more than 450,000 brownfield sites in the United States. Between 2013 and 2019, the Environmental Protection Agency awarded around 1,000 grants for cleanup of these sites, for a total of almost $190 million. A 2018 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research indicated that property values in the surrounding neighborhoods rise when brownfield sites are remediated. Of course, the Environmental Protection Agency is now under the direction of an individual with very different views about the role of this agency. In 2019, there were still more than 450,000 brownfields identified across the United States. The Environmental Protection Agency estimated in 2022 that since inception of its brownfields program, only 2,100 properties have been cleaned. What we find in almost every town, city, and other community in the United States is a large number of vacant industrial and other buildings, often surrounded by land contaminated by buried chemicals. Now let's take a look at the amount of vacant land abandoned in our cities and towns all across the country. Nationally, an average 16.7% of large cities' land area is considered vacant, with approximately 4% of city addresses unoccupied. Regional variations exist in both the amount and kind of vacant land, suggesting that any ameliorative actions should be designed to fit specific conditions. Cities also reported that most vacant parcels are small, odd-shaped, and disconnected, making them difficult to redevelop. In 2024, the cities with the highest vacancy rates in the United States include Miami, New Orleans, and Tampa, Florida. These cities have high vacancy rates due to a number of factors, including high home prices, unused rental homes, and vacation properties. A study by LendingTree published in October 2024 found that there are 5.6 million vacant buildings in the United States. The amount of land that could be developed but has been vacant for years or decades is indicative of a failure to use the property tax as a trigger to bring land back to its highest best use. During 2024, Detroit continued to grapple with a significant issue of vacant land, with large swaths of abandoned properties scattered throughout the city, primarily resulting from population decline and economic hardship, creating challenges for revitalization efforts while also presenting opportunities for community-driven development like urban farming and green spaces. The city is actively working to address this through initiatives like the Detroit Land Bank Authority. Within the 20 most populous cities in the United States, there are nearly 517,000 acres of developable land that remains vacant. In just two cities, Dallas and Fort Worth, there are more than 165,000 acres of vacant land. Phoenix is third with over 53,000 acres of vacant land. After Phoenix comes two other Texas cities, San Antonio for 49,000 acres and Houston 46,000 acres. Los Angeles is sixth with 42,000 acres of vacant land. Coast to coast, the United States is littered with diverse abandoned places, from deserted theme parks and ivy-clad mansions to industrial plants and once lavish resorts left to decay. More on the next slide. It's no secret that much of our physical infrastructure needs to be replaced. While we wait for government to allocate the revenue required to maintain and rebuild the nation's infrastructure, the situation becomes more dangerous and desperate. Part of that problem is our nation's roadways and bridges. The National Highway System is essentially the lifeblood of the nation's commerce and public mobility. Although constituting only about 4% of the nation's roads, it carries more than 40% of all highway traffic, 75% of heavy truck traffic, and 90% of all tourist traffic. More than 90% of all U.S. residents live within 5 miles of this network. Roughly 4.3 million miles of roads and highways crisscross the United States. A 2013 Department of Transportation report stated that of the more than $200 billion spent on U.S. highways in 2010, about half was used for capital investments and a quarter for routine maintenance and traffic services. Public spending on highway and street construction in the United States soared in 2022 and 2023. In the years before that, highway and street construction had been rising steadily. The public sector spent approximately $102.9 billion on such projects in 2021, but $137 billion in 2023. Bridges in poor condition represent 6.8% of the 2024 U.S. bridge inventory, compared to 7.3% in 2020. Based on average cost data submitted by states to the U.S. Department of Transportation, the American Road and Transportation Builders Association estimates it would cost over $400 billion to make all needed repairs. Bridges are susceptible to damage and deterioration from a variety of causes. In 1968, a U.S. Navy training aircraft crashed into the eastern side of the Oakland Bay Bridge, causing considerable damage. Then, in 1989, a 6.9 magnitude earthquake caused a 50-foot section of the upper deck to collapse on the lower deck. The bridge had to be closed for over a month. The photograph in the upper left is of the 2007 collapse of a major bridge in Minnesota. Highway-related excise tax revenue totaled $41.5 billion in 2022, 40% of all excise tax revenue. Gasoline and diesel taxes, which are 18.4 and 24.4 cents per gallon, respectively, make up over 85% of total highway tax revenue, with the remaining from taxes on other fuels, trucks, trailers, and tires. If this forecast by Eno Center for Transportation is accurate, states and the federal government will have to shift revenue to highways or increase direct taxes and other fees. Well, what about water and sewer systems in our cities and towns all across the country? Cumulative local expenditures for both water and sewer utility infrastructure and operations from 1993 to 2020 reached a total of $2.53 trillion. Total sewer utility expenditures were $1.1 trillion, and total water utility expenditures were $1.4 trillion. An Environmental Protection Agency study released in September of 2024 stated that water system upgrades could cost more than $1 trillion over the next 20 years. Every community of any size has the challenges of securing adequate sources of water, installing and maintaining piping systems to carry water to and from all properties, and treating wastewater to a high level of purity for reuse. For much of the history of the country, our rivers, lakes, and streams have been used for the dumping of toxic chemicals, as well as human and animal wastes. Nature does its best to rid the toxins over time, but is overwhelmed by our continued abuse of this essential natural resource. An analysis of drinking water quality by the nonprofit Environmental Working Group found that unsafe levels of harmful chemicals existed in many parts of the country. The greatest exposure was found near urban areas and potential chemical sources, with high counts in the Great Plains, Great Lakes, Eastern Seaboard, and central Southern California. Many of America's critical sources of underground water are in a state of rapid and accelerating decline. More than half of the aquifers in the United States are losing water, according to research published in Nature. And of course, we know the problem of plastics. Plastics are everywhere. Concern over the quality of tap water continues to serve as a primary reason for the consumption of bottled water, despite the huge quantity of plastic waste that must be recycled or disposed of. The irony is that nearly half of all bottled water is sourced from the municipal water supply, then purified. Average U.S. consumption per person has increased each year from 42.3 gallons in 2018 to 46.5 gallons in 2024. In addition to the plastic waste created, studies of bottled water quality carried out in Europe found chemicals in the water leached from the plastic bottles, from the lids, and from contamination of the wells from which the water is drawn. The United States is now a net importer of plastic scrap, and in 2024, this reached a record high of 492,101 metric tons. This type of plastic, polyethylene terephthalate, is considered one of the most recyclable plastics, allowing for a closed-loop recycling process where old plastic can be turned into new products. Millions of marine animals are killed by plastics every year. Marine species of all sizes, from zooplankton to whales, consume microplastics. Ocean currents pull small plastic particles from Asia all the way to Hawaii's Big Island. Ramani Narayan, a chemical engineering professor at Michigan State University, puts the scale of the problem in its proper context. Let's say you recycle 100% in all of North America and Europe. You still would not make a dent on the plastics released into the oceans. If you want to do something about this, you have to go there to these countries and deal with the mismanaged waste. Now we'll take a look at our commuter rail systems. The age distribution of U.S. rail vehicles shows great disparities. Many are 15 or fewer years old, while more than 2,000 have been in service for 40 years or more. This is in part a reflection of their initial expense and intended lifespan, but also a consequence of long-standing underinvestment in large urban transit systems. The majority of the longest-serving vehicles are for commuter rail systems. A 2016 study commissioned by the American Public Transportation Association found a direct relationship between the quality of public transportation and the expansion of businesses that employ knowledge workers. As stated by APTA Chair Valerie McCall, public transportation is the catalyst that attracts knowledge workers who show a preference to be connected with multiple transportation options to high-growth business centers. It allows these innovation districts to create dense business infrastructure that preserves key community benefits while mitigating congestion issues and providing businesses greater access to labor. In October of 2024, the Biden-Harris administration announced the allocation of $2.4 billion in new freight and passenger rail networks. Moving on, let's take a look at infrastructure spending and how they affect land values. What brings people to a community is the opportunity to secure employment, the opportunity to secure a decent and affordable home, and the opportunity to enjoy the amenities provided by the public and private sectors. The quality of these amenities is directly related to public expenditure and how the revenue is raised to meet the expenses incurred. The planning community has in recent years awakened to the significant, often enormous increase in land values caused by the extension of public transit systems into new areas and by the improvement of existing transit hubs. The concept of transit-oriented development is embraced as a needed response to sprawling development and continued dependency on use of the automobile for commuting between home and work. This has stimulated discussion of whether and how to capture these increased land values to offset the cost of the public transit investments. Rick Rybeck, a city planner and director of the firm Just Economics based in Washington, D.C., supports restructuring the conventional property tax in order to efficiently capture the increases in land value associated with public infrastructure investment. He writes, "Surprisingly, the higher tax on land helps keep land prices more affordable. It reduces the profit from land speculation, thereby reducing the speculative demand for land. Returning infrastructure created land values to the public helps make infrastructure financially self-sustaining, at least to a greater degree than today, and thereby reduces the need for other taxes and subsidies. It also creates some fairness in infrastructure funding because landowners who benefit from infrastructure end up paying in proportion to the benefits that they receive. Well, how do we treat our lakes, rivers, and streams? There are no laws or regulations prohibiting discharges of many toxins into our lakes, into our rivers, and our streams. The pollution includes dead zone producing nitrates from food processors, mercury and other heavy metals from steel plants, and toxic chemicals from various kinds of refineries. Back in 2020, algae covered the Copco Reservoir in Northern California. This occurs frequently because nutrients become trapped in the warmer water of the reservoirs, creating an ideal breeding ground for blooms of algae. About 70% of the Earth's surface water supplies are contaminated by runoff from fertilizers, pesticides, and animal waste from farms and livestock operations that produce pathogens. Nutrient pollution caused by excess nitrogen and phosphorus in water or air is the #1 threat to water quality worldwide. 16 states reported illnesses from toxic algae in 2021. More than likely, the Trump administration at the EPA will grant permission to oil drillers to discharge wastewater directly into rivers and streams. This wastewater contains huge amounts of salt, heavy metals, and other chemicals. And then there's natural gas. The production and use of natural gas in the U.S. is at an all-time record level, growing every year since 2010. There are real monetary savings over oil or most other sources of electrical energy. There are at least perceived environmental advantages over the burning of oil or coal. The Union of Concerned Scientists put these advantages in a balanced context. Natural gas emits 50 to 60% less carbon dioxide when combusted in a new, efficient natural gas power plant compared with emissions from a typical new coal plant. Considering only tailpipe emissions, natural gas also emits 15 to 20% less heat-trapping gases than gasoline when burned in today's typical vehicle. Emissions from smokestacks and tailpipes, however, do not tell the whole story. The drilling and extraction of natural gas from wells and its transportation in pipelines results in the leakage of methane, primary component of natural gas that is 34 times stronger than CO2 at trapping heat over a 100-year period and 86 times stronger over 20 years. Preliminary studies and field measurements show that these so-called fugitive methane emissions range from 1 to 9% of total life cycle emissions. Whether natural gas has lower life cycle greenhouse gas emissions than coal and oil depends on the assumed leakage rate, the global warming potential of methane over different time frames, the energy conversion efficiency, and other factors. The pipelines through which natural gas is distributed need to be replaced in many parts of the country. A 2013 report released by the U.S. Senate found that, quote, gas distribution companies in 2011 reported releasing 69 billion cubic feet of natural gas to the atmosphere, almost enough to meet the state of Maine's gas need for a year. This graph shows the distribution of the age of the pipelines. One analyst, Chris Dalby of the energy company Eni, succinctly describes the scale of the problem. An issue that has overcome much of the goodwill toward fixing energy infrastructure is the sheer scale of the problem. Given the interconnection of pipes, pipelines, and transmission lines across state lines, under lakes and rivers, and through deserts, tracking where the most serious issues lie is arduous at best. According to current estimates, around 1% of total natural gas production in the United States is leaked into the atmosphere, though some studies suggest this figure could be significantly higher, reaching up to 3% or more, depending on the region and source of data. This leaked gas is primarily methane, a potent greenhouse gas. So, with all this, is the air safe to breathe? Measured by particulate pollution, the quality of air in the United States ranks 10th in the world. Microscopic pollution is a byproduct of burning and commonly comes from power plants, automobile and truck exhaust, and wildfires. New research from the nonprofit First Street Foundation finds that climate change is increasing the prevalence of two of the air pollutants most harmful to human health: particulate matter and tropospheric ozone. California's number of days with hazardous air quality has increased by more than 1,100% since 2000. Many parts of the West have seen an increase of nearly 500% since 2000. A major source of air pollutants is the power plants that generate the electricity we rely on. A report by the Clean Air Task Force found that about 7,500 deaths each year are attributable to the fine particle pollution from U.S. power plants. U.S. energy-related CO2 emissions decreased slightly in 2023 compared to 2022. Although emissions decreased across many economic sectors, more than 80% of U.S. energy-related CO2 emissions reductions in 2023 occurred in the electric power sector. These reductions were caused largely by reduced coal-fired electricity generation, as natural gas and solar power made up a larger portion of the generation mix. Okay, so we finished with our talk about the effect on the environment and all its factors. What's coming next? At the core of our challenges as a society are what the author Ferdinand Lundberg described as cracks in the Constitution. We will look at these issues next.